Imagine a quiet town suddenly shaken by a dark and shocking secret, a body by the river, a respected sheriff, and a hidden affair that changes everything. Is this just a simple betrayal, or are there deeper secrets behind this gruesome murder? If you're ready for a story full of deceit, lies, and untold mysteries, hit that like button right now and stay with us. The ending of this story will leave you speechless. In the quiet town of Crestridge, Georgia, the sheriff was more than just a figure of authority. He was a symbol of stability, someone that townsfolk trusted without question. Sheriff Matthew Holbrook, a 38-year-old lawman, was known for his calm demeanor and sense of duty, a husband and father who had protected his town for years. But the discovery of a young woman's body by the riverbank shattered the town's peace. It wasn't the kind of crime that Crestridge was used to. There had been no sign of struggle, no obvious motive for the death. The woman was identified as Aisha Khan, a 19-year-old Muslim girl from a local immigrant family. Her death was unexpected, but what followed was even more shocking. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this was not just an accidental death or a simple crime of passion. Hidden behind the sheriff's badge was a secret that no one had seen coming, a secret affair between Matthew Holbrook and Aisha Khan. Their illicit relationship, hidden from the world, set in motion a chain of events that led to betrayal, lies, and ultimately murder. I'm really happy you're with us. As we get started, please remember to like this video to support our work, and feel free to share which country do you call home. Crestridge was a town that prided itself on its tranquility. It was a place where the biggest scandal was a broken fence dispute or a teenager caught speeding down Main Street. Most of the residents had lived there for generations, and newcomers were rare. Everyone knew each other, and there was a sense of security in the predictable routines of small-town life. It was a town that didn't expect change and certainly didn't expect tragedy. At the heart of this peaceful town was Sheriff Matthew Holbrook. At 38, Matthew was a respected figure, not only because of his title, but because of his personal dedication to his role. He had served the community for 5 years as sheriff, and before that, he had been a deputy for nearly a decade. His life seemed picture perfect. He had a loving wife, Susan, and 2 young children. From the outside, the Holbrook family represented the ideal Southern family, complete with Sunday church services and backyard barbecues. But beneath the surface, Matthew's life was far from perfect. His marriage to Susan had grown cold over the years. What had once been a passionate relationship had turned into a monotonous routine. Susan was a devoted wife and mother, but she had become more focused on the children and her role in the community than on her marriage. Matthew, too, had become distant, throwing himself into his work and avoiding the emotional void that had developed between them. Aisha Khan, on the other hand, was a striking contrast to the residents of Crestridge. At just 19, she was the daughter of Muslim immigrants who had moved to Crestridge a decade ago. The Khan family owned a small grocery store in town, and while they were respected by most of the residents, they remained somewhat isolated. Aisha's parents were conservative, holding tightly to their cultural and religious values, but Aisha was different. She had grown up caught between 2 worlds, her parents' traditional expectations and her own desire for freedom and independence. Aisha was bright, ambitious, and restless. She had dreams of leaving Crestridge, going to college, and experiencing the world beyond the confines of her small town. But for now, she was stuck in Crestridge, working at her family's store and living under the watchful eye of her parents. It was a chance encounter that brought Aisha and Matthew together. One day there had been a small theft at the Khan family store. Matthew was called to investigate, and it was during that routine visit that he first met Aisha. She was polite and respectful, but there was something about her that caught Matthew's attention, an intensity in her eyes, a sharpness to her words. She wasn't like the other young women in Crestridge, and that intrigued him. In the weeks following their first meeting, Matthew found reasons to stop by the Khan family store more frequently. What began as casual conversation between the sheriff and a young woman soon turned into something more. Aisha would ask Matthew about his work, his life in law enforcement, and the stories of the town. Matthew, in turn, was drawn to her curiosity, her intelligence, and the way she seemed to be searching for something beyond the life she knew. Their interactions were subtle at first, innocuous questions about the law, light-hearted banter about the small town gossip. But with each passing conversation, an unspoken tension began to build between them. Aisha's fascination with Matthew grew, not just because of his position as sheriff, but because he represented a world that was so different from the ones she had grown up in. For Matthew, the attraction was undeniable. Aisha's youth and vitality were intoxicating. She made him feel alive in a way he had and felt in years. At home, his marriage with Susan had become more of a partnership than a romance. They shared responsibilities, but the emotional and physical connection had withered away long ago. Susan was a devoted mother, but her focus on the children in the community left little room for their relationship. Aisha, on the other hand, made Matthew feel wanted. She listened to him, challenged him, and admired him, and he couldn't help but be drawn to the excitement of it all. The secrecy, the danger, the thrill of being with someone so much younger. What began as an innocent friendship soon crossed the line into something far more complicated. One night, after a particularly long day at the sheriff's office, Matthew found himself driving past the Kahn family's store. It was late and the town was quiet. He saw the light still on in the store and decided to stop in. Aisha was there, the loan closing up for the night. They exchanged a few words, but there was a tension in the air, a tension that neither of them could ignore. Matthew knew it was wrong. He knew that if anyone found out, it would destroy not only his career but his family. But in that moment, standing in the dimly lit store with Isha looking at him with a mix of admiration and desire, he couldn't walk away. He leaned in his hand, brushing against hers, and that was all it took. Their first kiss was tentative, but it was enough to break the dam that had been holding back their emotions. From that night on, their relationship changed. They began meeting in secret, sneaking away to neighboring towns where no one knew them, exchanging texts late into the night, and eventually their physical relationship deepened. The affair was everything Matthew had been missing in his life: excitement, passion, and the sense of being wanted. But as thrilling as it was also dangerous. Matthew was a public figure, and Aisha was the daughter of a devout Muslim family. If anyone found out, the consequences would be catastrophic. They both knew the risks, but the pull of their attraction was too strong to resist. As the weeks turned into months, the affair between Matthew and Aisha intensified. But with the passion came the weight of secrecy, and for Aisha, the burden became unbearable. She had always felt torn between the expectations of her family and her desire for independence, but now she was caught into the web of lies that threatened to unravel her entire life. Aisha's parents had begun pressuring her to marry. They had already started introducing her to potential suitors within their community, young men from similar backgrounds who would uphold the family's values. Aisha, however, had no interest in marrying someone chosen by her parents. She had dreams of going to college, of seeing the world, but she knew that those dreams were slipping away with each passing day. The affair with Matthew had given her a sense of control, a way to rebel against the life her parents had mapped out for her. But it also made her feel trapped. She knew that their relationship couldn't last. Matthew was a married man with a family, and she was too young to be caught up in something so complicated. The guilt gnawed at her, and the fear of being discovered kept her up at night. Matthew, too, was feeling the pressure. His double life was taking its toll. At home, Susan had noticed the changes in him: his late nights, his increasing distance, his mood swings. She didn't know the reason for his behavior, but she knew something was wrong. The affair had consumed Matthew's thoughts, and he found it harder and harder to keep up the facade of being the perfect husband and sheriff. As Aisha pulled away emotionally, Matthew became more desperate. He didn't want to lose her, but he knew that their relationship was on borrowed time. They both knew that something had to give, but neither of them was prepared for what was about to happen next. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, comment with number 1, and if not, drop a number 0. Was prepared for what was about to happen next. In the shallow waters of the Broadleaf River, lay still and motionless. At first, the jogger thought it might have been an animal caught in the river, but as he got closer, the unmistakable shape of a human body became clear. The jogger immediately called 911, and within minutes, the Crestridge Sheriff's Department was on the scene. Sheriff Matthew Holbrook arrived, his heart pounding in his chest as he approached the body. The sight that greeted him sent a shockwave of terror through him. There, lying in the cold water, was Aisha Khan. Her face was pale, her clothes soaked, and there were no immediate signs of trauma. To anyone else, it might have looked like an accidental drowning, but Matthew knew better. The fear that had been building inside him for weeks now turned into full-blown panic. He couldn't let anyone know about their relationship, not now, not ever. The local coroner, Dr. Harold Banks, arrived on the scene and conducted a preliminary examination. There were no obvious signs of violence, but something about the scene didn't sit right with him. Aisha's body was too still, too peaceful, as if she had been placed in the water rather than having fallen in by accident. Dr. Banks ordered an autopsy, and the body was transported to the county morgue. Meanwhile, Matthew did his best to maintain his composure. He issued a statement to the press expressing his condolences to the Khan family and promising a full investigation into Aisha's death. But inside, he was crumbling. He knew that if anyone dug too deeply into her life, they would find the connection between them, and that would be the end of everything. As the investigation into Aisha's death began, Detective Eleanor Marsh from a neighboring county was called in to assist. Marsh was known for her sharp investigative skills and her ability to see through deception. From the moment she arrived in Crestridge, she sensed that something was off. The town, though small and quiet, seemed to be hiding a secret, and Marsh was determined to uncover it. Marsh began by interviewing those closest to Aisha, her family devastated by the loss, told Marsh that Aisha had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to her death. She had become more withdrawn, more secretive, and she had been avoiding her parents' questions about her future. They had assumed it was just the typical behavior of a young woman grappling with the pressures of adulthood, but now they wondered if there had been something more. Aisha's friends also painted a picture of a young woman who had been struggling. She had confided in a few of them that she was seeing someone, but she never revealed his identity. She had hinted that he was older, that their relationship was complicated, and that she didn't know what to do. Her friends had brushed it off as a fling, something that would pass, but now they were starting to see the warning signs they had missed. Marcia's instincts told her that Aisha's death was no accident. There were too many unanswered questions, too many loose ends, but without any concrete evidence, she was left with little to go on. The autopsy results would take time, and for now, all she had were suspicions. As the investigation into Aisha's death continued, Matthew Holbrook's life began to spiral out of control. He was a man accustomed to order, discipline, and control, qualities that had served him well as sheriff. But now everything he had worked so hard to build was on the verge of collapse. The weight of the affair, the discovery of Aisha's body, and the investigation that followed were all closing in on him. At home, his wife Susan noticed the changes in him more than anyone. Matthew had always been a private man, but his distance in recent months had grown unbearable. He rarely spoke at dinner, often staying late at the office or taking long drives with no explanation. Susan had begun asking questions, gently at first, but more insistently as time went on. Matthew, unable to give her the answers she sought, withdrew even further, his guilt manifesting as irritability and paranoia. But the investigation was the real source of his fear. As sheriff, Matthew had access to all the evidence, and with each new piece that came in, his anxiety grew. He knew that if anyone discovered the nature of his relationship with Aisha, he would be finished. Not just as sheriff, but as a husband, father, and member of the community. Everything would be stripped away. In a moment of desperation, Matthew took matters into his own hands. He went to the evidence locker late one night, using his position to access Aisha's personal effects. Her phone had been found near the river, but it had been damaged, and the investigators had yet to recover any data from it. Matthew knew that if they managed to unlock the phone, their messages would reveal everything: the secret meetings, the affair, and the final argument they had before her death. With shaking hands, he deleted the evidence. The messages were wiped from the phone, and the phone itself was quietly discarded into a dumpster far from the sheriff's office. He told himself that this was the only way to protect his family, but deep down, he knew that his actions were digging him deeper into a web of lies from which there would be no escape. As Detective Eleanor Marsh continued her investigation, she began to piece together a more complete picture of Aisha's life. Aisha had been, by all accounts, a bright and ambitious young woman with dreams of leaving Cressitridge for college, but something had changed in the months before her death. She had become more withdrawn, her friend said, more secretive and more anxious. Marsh interviewed Aisha's parents, Imran and Fatima Khan, who were devastated by their daughter's death. They described her as a dutiful daughter who had always respected their wishes, but in recent months they had noticed her becoming more distant. They had assumed it was the typical behavior of a young woman grappling with the pressures of adulthood, but now they wondered if they had missed something crucial. One of Aisha's friends, Layla Abbas, provided Marsh with a key piece of information. Layla revealed that Aisha had been involved with an older man, though she had never shared his name. Aisha had confided in Layla that she was deeply conflicted about the relationship. She felt trapped, torn between her feelings for this man and her fear of what her family would think if they ever found out. Layla described Aisha's growing anxiety, her fear that things were moving too fast, and the feeling that she was in over her head. This revelation set off alarm bells for March. Who was this older man, and why hadn't anyone come forward about the relationship? The more March dug into Ayata's past, the more she began to suspect that this man, whoever he was, held the key to understanding Aisha's death. Marcia's suspicions were further confirmed when she gained access to Aisha's online accounts. Though much of her social media presence was carefully curated, there were private messages exchanged with someone using the alias M. The messages were cryptic, filled with emotional language about being trapped, feeling overwhelmed, and wanting to escape. In one of the last messages Aisha sent, she wrote, "We need to talk. I don't know what to do anymore." Marsh knew she was getting closer to the truth, but the identity of M remained a mystery. She had a feeling that this older man wasn't just any random person. He was someone with power, someone who had a vested interest in keeping their relationship a secret. Just as Marsh was beginning to piece together the fragments of Asia's secret life, a mysterious call came into the sheriff's office. The caller refused to give their name, but claimed to have seen a meeting with a man just days before her death. According to the caller, the man was in his late 30s with dark hair and had been driving a black SUV, the same make and model as Matthew Holbrook's vehicle. The anonymous tip sent shockwaves through the investigation. Marsh had already begun to suspect that Aisha's lover was someone in a position of authority, and this call seemed to confirm her worst fears. But without more evidence, there was little she could do. She needed something concrete, something that would directly tie Matthew to Asia's death. Marcia's next move was to confront Matthew himself. She approached him carefully, asking routine questions about the investigation and subtly probing for any signs of guilt. Matthew, though outwardly calm, couldn't shake the feeling that Marcia was onto him. He denied knowing Ayesha beyond a professional capacity, insisting that he had only interacted with her in relation to the theft at her family's store. But Mars wasn't convinced. There was something about the way Matthew avoided eye contact, the way his answers seemed rehearsed. She had dealt with enough liars in her career to know when someone was hiding something. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Marsh began reviewing the town's surveillance footage from the week leading up to Aisha's death. It was a long shot, but she hoped that somewhere in the hours of grainy footage she might find a clue. Days turned into weeks, and Marsh's investigation pressed on. As she scoured through security footage from local businesses and public spaces, she finally caught a break. A camera positioned outside a gas station on the outskirts of town captured a fleeting but crucial image. Aisha getting into a black SUV just 1 week before her body was found. Though the footage wasn't clear enough to definitively identify the driver, the SUV was a match for the one Matthew drove. Armed with this new evidence, Marsh returned to question Matthew. She confronted him with the footage, asking him to explain why ICE had been seen getting into a vehicle that matched his. Matthew denied any involvement, claiming that the footage was too blurry to make any definitive conclusions. He insisted that he had no relationship with Aisha outside of his role as sheriff, and he tried to downplay the significance of the footage, but Marsh wasn't buying it. The more Matthew tried to distance himself from Aisha, the more convinced she became that he was hiding something. She began digging deeper into Matthew's personal life, interviewing his colleagues, friends, and even his wife, Susan. It was during an interview with one of Matthew's deputies that Marsh uncovered another key piece of information. The deputy, who wished to remain anonymous, confided in Marsh that Matthew had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to Aisha's death. He had been working late more often, taking unplanned trips out of town, and seemed unusually tense. The deputy also mentioned that Matthew had been seen meeting with Aisha on more than one occasion, though he had never thought much of it at the time. But now, in light of Aisha's death, the deputy couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. With each new revelation, when Marsh's suspicions grew stronger, Matthew was hiding something that connected him to Aisha's death. But without concrete proof, Mars knew that Matthew would continue to evade justice. As Marcia continued to piece together the puzzle, a new breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While reviewing Aisha's financial records, she discovered a hidden bank account in her name, an account that had been receiving large, regular deposits over the past several months. The source of the money was difficult to trace, but after hours of digging, Marsh managed to connect the deposits to a series of accounts linked to none other than Matthew Holbrook. The discovery was a game changer. It was clear that Matthew had been supporting Aisha financially, likely to keep their affair hidden. The money was meant to buy her silence, but it had also become a lifeline for Aisha as she tried to navigate the complexities of their relationship. Marsh now had enough evidence to confront Matthew directly. She brought him in for questioning, laying out the financial records, the surveillance footage, and the testimonies of those who had seen him with Aisha. Matthew's facade finally began to crack. At first, he continued to deny everything, insisting that the money was for a completely unrelated matter and that his meetings with Aisha were purely professional. But March wasn't letting him off the hook. She pressed harder, pointing out the inconsistencies in his story, the timeline that didn't add up, and the overwhelming evidence that pointed to a deeper relationship with Aisha. Matthew knew the walls were closing in. He could feel the pressure mounting, and for the first time, he realized that there was no way out. His secret was about to be exposed, and with it, everything he had worked for would come crashing down. Just as it seemed like Matthew was about to be arrested for Aisha's murder, a shocking twist emerged, one that neither Marsh nor Matthew had seen coming. Forensic evidence from the autopsy revealed that Aisha hadn't drowned. Instead, she had been poisoned. The poison had been administered in small doses over time, leading to her death just days before her body was found. The substance used was a rare toxin, and further investigation traced the source back to the Khan family's store. Marsh was stunned. All this time, she had been focused on Matthew, convinced that he was responsible for Aisha's death. But now, the evidence was pointing in a completely different direction. The investigation took a dramatic turn as Marsh began to focus on Aisha's family. It didn't take long for the truth to come to light. Aisha's father, Imran Khan, had discovered the affair between his daughter and Matthew weeks before her death. Enraged by the dishonor the relationship had brought upon his family, Imran had made the decision to take matters into his own hands. In a series of chilling confessions, Imran revealed that he had been slowly poisoning Ayesha, hoping to rid himself of the shame she had brought to the family. He had carefully planned her death to make it look like an accident, but his plan had ultimately failed. The news of Imran's arrest sent shockwaves through Crestridge. Ayesha's death had been the result of a father's misguided sense of honor, not the actions of a corrupt sheriff, but the damage had already been done. Matthew Holbrook's life was left in ruins, though he hadn't been responsible for Ayesha's death. His affair with her had been exposed, and the fallout was devastating. He was forced to resign as sheriff, his marriage to Susan crumbled, and his reputation in the town of Crestridge was irreparably damaged. He had once been a man of integrity, respected by his peers, but now he was nothing more than a disgraced former sheriff whose darkest secret had cost him everything. Ayesha's death continued to haunt the town long after the case was closed. Her family was left shattered by the tragedy, and the community was divided by the revelations of the affair in the poisoning. The case had exposed the deep cultural and personal tensions that lay beneath the surface of the town, leaving scars that would never fully heal. In the end, the case became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how hidden desires, cultural pressures, and misguided loyalties can lead to devastating consequences. Matthew Holbrook had sought excitement and passion outside his marriage, but what he found was destruction and loss. In Aisha, a young woman caught between two worlds, had paid the ultimate price for a love that could never be. The story of Sheriff Matthew Holbrook and Aisha Khan was one of passion, betrayal, and tragedy. What began as an illicit affair between a powerful man and a young woman ended with a devastating murder that left a community reeling. The investigation uncovered not only the dark secrets of their relationship, but also the hidden tensions within Aisha's family, tensions that ultimately led to her untimely death. In the end, no one emerged unscathed. Aisha was gone. Matthew's life was in shambles, and the Khan family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered world. The case served as a stark reminder of the dangers of deception, the weight of cultural expectations, and the deadly consequences of keeping secrets hidden for too long. As the town of Crestridge tried to move on, the memory of Ayatas's tragic death lingered, a haunting reminder of a story that had no winners, only victims.